Good morning, Clem, too, and everyone. Hope you have a good weekend. Although I know for the family of the late Patricia, your hearts are grieving, and our hearts are grieving with you. So sorry to hear the sudden loss that your family experienced. We're having rain today, and you, Clem, too, are having a lot of snow. I keep getting pictures, a lot of snow. So some of you I know are going to enjoy that. Some of you are not going to enjoy that so much. But anyway, here we are, the beginning of another week, and we are now at the end of our series called God's Top 10 List of Good Behavior. I don't know how many weeks we've spent on this. Kind of have a big day coming up in a few weeks. I've tallied up all of my podcasts since Andrew moved to Oregon and I started doing them on my own. And as near as I can tell, I'm at 244. That means number 250 is just like 2 weeks away. I can't believe it. Can't believe we've done that many together. But in this series, I didn't really count how many of these we've done, but we've been looking at the 10 Commandments and what can they mean for our own lives. And we're actually going to conclude the series with a little series on grace to remind us that you actually can't make yourself good to God by doing these things, but you can live right before God by doing these things. But we're only made right with God through his son Jesus and what he did on the cross for us. That's our only hope of being right with God. But after that, then we move on to the phase of how should we live as followers of Jesus Christ. So we've been looking at the 10 Commandments. It was a set of 10 laws, commandments, principles, statements. I listened to a Jewish rabbi last night explaining the 10 Commandments and specifically the 10th one. And he said the literal word in Hebrew is statement. However you want to think about them, they were for the people of Israel as they formed their own country, but it has meaning for us too, because it tells us a lot about the heart of human beings and the heart of God and where we ought to go in our behavior. And that's why I called it God's top 10 list of good behavior. We've come to the last one. You shall not covet. It's interesting that this is the very last one that God gave in the list of 10. And it's interesting to me on multiple levels, one of which is the fact that we all suffer from this. For one, there's not a human being alive that escapes the temptation to want to have something that somebody else has. And we use various words for that. Like covet is one word used here in the 10 Commandments. And we're going to actually look at the verse itself in a second. We sometimes use the word jealousy. We're jealous of what other people have. Or we might use the word lust in there. I was trying to think of some other words that we might use. But since the beginning of humankind, this has been a universal struggle for everybody. I mean, everybody. Everybody covets or is tempted to covet at some point in their life. So let's look at the actual verse. Here it is at the end of the 10 Commandments. God's top 10 list of good behavior. You can see it highlighted there, but here's the actual verse. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, and you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So, interesting. We can covet all kinds of things. We can covet possessions. So you have your neighbor's house listed. That's coveting things that other people own. And it goes on to say that anything that belongs to your neighbor, we can covet people. And so it says, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or his female servant. And here's the possessions again, his ox or his donkey, the very things that allow him to live. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list. It's meant to be what would be called a representative list. It's listing some of the things that we might covet, that we should not covet. So possessions, people, power, position, all those things and more. We should not covet. Where does this all come from? Well, real quick, let's go back to the very beginning story in the Bible. Genesis chapter 2 and Genesis chapter 3. I pulled out a couple of verses. After God made everything, 6 days, he made it all. He looked at it. At the end of it, he said, wow, that's not only good, that is very good. That is just the way I hoped it would be. And that's awesome, except for the fact that we don't live in that world anymore, do we? You look around, like we have a grieving family this week. That was not part of the original created order. You guys are having snowmageddon in Clem 2. I know there was snow in God's original world, but when it gets to be too much, or it causes an accident, or whatever, that was not part of God's original plan. Some of you are sick. That was not part of God's original plan. Some of you are going through relational problems right now. That was not part of God's original plan. All these things that go wrong are not part of God's original plan. So what in the world happened? All right, let's take a quick look at a couple verses. Here in Genesis chapter 2, God said after he made everything, he put Adam and Eve, the first man, the first woman, into the garden. And he said this, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. This was a good thing. Work was a good thing. And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden. So you can have apples, you can have oranges, you can eat limes, you can eat potatoes, you can eat, well, that's not from a tree, but you know what I mean? You can eat all these nuts. You can, if it comes from a tree, you can eat it, except for you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. Let's fast forward into chapter 3. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, all right, we are now into coveting. We are now into lust. She looked at it and she thought, well, I'm not allowed to have that, but I would really like that because it really looks kind of good. When she saw that it was pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, that's another form of coveting or lust, she took some and she ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And it's really interesting when you read the story. Suddenly it says that they knew they were naked, and that literally they suddenly knew they were naked. Before that, they walked around naked and they never gave a thought about it. But now there was shame involved. And so they tried to cover up their bodies and they tried to cover up their shame and they hid from God and all that stuff. That was the very first sin. And that was actually the sin of coveting. Eve saw something that she wasn't allowed to have that was not hers, and she wanted it. And so she took it. And then she convinced her husband, Adam, to do the same. And he took it. And then death came into mankind, and all kinds of problems came into mankind. So this is actually the very first sin that we as human beings have struggled with since the beginning. Now, what is the answer? Well, I'm going to come back to that on Wednesday, Lord willing. We're going to look a little bit at some of the answers related to that, but it's enough to know that even though there's always a positive side to a negative command, for now, it's good enough to know that God said to us, don't covet. If it's not yours, don't worry about it. It's okay that it's not yours. You'll survive. You really will. You'll survive without the latest iPhone or whatever it is. You know, I love Samsung, but whatever it is, phones, property, stuff, money, people, whatever. If it's not yours, don't worry about it. Not going to make you happy anyway. Be happy with what you have and be happy with the Lord. That's my word for the day. Again, to the family of the late Patricia, we are praying for you and hope the Lord is with you during this very difficult week as you walk through that. So anyway, for the rest of you, I hope to see you on Wednesday.